Remember, in the book of Philippians, he talks a lot about joy. Joy. Why? Because the church in Philippi were facing opposition and intense persecution. And so he says to them in verse 5, be humble. Let the mind of Christ be in you. He was humble in suffering, and God exalted him. So when he was encouraging and admonishing the brethren in Philippi, using Christ as their example of humility in suffering, he now got up to verse 12, and he now said to them, Philippians 2:12, wherefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Work out, not work for. Work out. Now, he's not referring to salvation from sin. Because in verse 13, he now says in verse 13 of 12, of chapter 2, for it is God which worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. The salvation he's talking about here, work out your salvation, is actually persecution. Persecution, salvation from persecution. In order for you to see further, Philippians chapter 1 verse 19. Philippians chapter 1 verse number 19. For I know that this shall turn to my salvation through your prayer and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. In the midst of persecution, because Paul here was in prison, he says, I know it shall turn to my salvation from this prison. So when he says work out your salvation, it's salvation in the midst of persecution, in the midst of opposition. Salvation. Work out your own salvation. Salvation from what? From the adversity, the opposition towards the gospel. They say it is God that worketh you both to will. Question, what is his will? To be humble, not to murmur, or not to get into strife because of the persecution. Because God is in you to do all of that to help you through this situation and bring you out. Then in verse 14 to 16 of that Philippians chapter 2, he continues the discourse after telling them, it is God that worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. He now says that ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Next verse. Holding forth the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain, neither labored in vain. In other words, he is saying, in the midst of persecution, you don't lose your Christian character. In the midst of persecution, you don't forget who you are and act contrary to who you are. In other words, we have those who preach a terrible doctrine. We have those who oppose the gospel, those who lie about the gospel. Then there are those who oppose sound doctrine, and they oppose the preachers. He calls them adversaries. And he says that these folks have a token of their perdition. The word there is the word waste. Perdition there is waste or destruction.